Great to have you here today. So can you tell us what you invest in?
First, thanks for having me. I am a seed stage investor with Speedinvest, and I invest in consumer technology. I've historically had a love for network effects, although I'm increasingly curious about hobbyist robotics as well.
And with consumer tech, right? So for so many people in the UK industry and in Europe, I guess as well, there's been such a focus on B2B. And you're obviously zigging where a lot of people are zagging, right?
Yep.
So what made you go for consumer, and why are you so interested in that side?
I mean, historically, the story of how I moved to London is sort of deeply mixed up with consumer tech. I was writing a blog about smartphone operating systems and the applications being built on them because I got my first smartphone, thought it was interesting. Long story short, that's how App Annie found me, and I moved to London to join them. App Annie was a app market data company for consumer apps. So all of our customers were pretty much the largest consumer apps and consumer tech companies in the world, all the way from Apple, Google, Facebook, Snapchat, everything. So learned a lot more about it there. And so when I left, I started getting deeper into network effects, a topic which I touched on repeatedly at App Annie and when I was writing my previous blog. And so started writing about that, got deeper into that. Founders started reaching out to me. And so I started naturally investing in that area because that was where my knowledge base was, my circle of competence was. And also that's where my deal flow as a consequence came from, right? So yeah, that's basically why I chose that specific topic. I've historically learned that the best investors are those that are deeply curious about and interested in their particular topic, and also develop a circle of competence. That way you know what you're looking at, and you also know what you shouldn't be looking at because outside your circle of competence. And
you mentioned that Google, Facebook, and all these massive companies. And I think Neil, who was obviously you're an investor in as well, came on and said about how everybody always talks about B2B SaaS, but then you look at the world's largest companies, and where are all of them? And when looking at that too, I guess it's in a way where it's a different style of investing with consumer in that the outcomes that are big are extremely big, but then there might be fewer smaller exits. Or How do you model that as well? How do you think about?
I mean, historically, venture as an asset class is built on large exits, and sort of the smaller exits don't really move the needle. So while it might seem like smaller exits are, you might say, the less risky path, it's almost the opposite. Because if the exit isn't large enough, you're not really returning your fund. And so philosophically, when I look at a company, I'm thinking about, okay, what's the path for this particular company to have a massive outsized success, and why this particular founder is the one who will have massive outsized success with this particular product. And everything else is kind of just noise.
So you said about how to pick the winners there as well. And I think when we were talking earlier, you said about how some of the traditional markers that people look for aren't actually that relevant when it comes to consumer. So what are you looking for? You're looking in founders, especially the early stages.
So when I look at a founder in particular, there's a couple of main things you're looking for. Right? First is the founder a missionary or a mercenary? Do they have a reason why they're building this product? Like, where did they get their insight from? Like, building a successful company is like a 7 to 10 year endeavor. If you're jumping into something because it's hot, you're not lasting that long. Often you see companies that sort of raise meaningful rounds and then kind of have like pointless, meaningless pivots every couple of months, every couple of years. It's usually because that founder's a mercenary. Like, he didn't see quick success. He doesn't really even if he doesn't really have fundamental belief in the problem or the idea. So instead of persevering, he's going to just switch. Even it could be the right path. It's impossible for him to know, because he or she doesn't really have it in him to pursue that path, because they went down that path for the wrong reasons. So the first is just kind of the motivation. What did you come across in your personal or professional life that convinced you that this was a problem worth solving, and why you were the right person to do it? So that's like step one. The second is a trick I picked up from like a Mark Andreessen interview years ago to kind of separate real founders from charlatan founders. A lot of founders are phenomenally good, very charismatic and really good storytellers, but they might be playing a part really well as opposed to being great founders themselves. And his trick is you ask them increasingly more specific questions. And someone who's in it for the right reasons will have spent so much time uncovering this that they will give you increasingly specific answers. And if you hit something that they don't understand, their natural response is curiosity, because they go, oh, that's a good question. I should probably go figure, or I'll get back to you with an answer. Whereas the wrong type of founders, they are the ones who will either get defensive or aggressive at that point. So it's a very easy way to kind of filter out folks that have the capability and in it for the right reasons, which is especially important in consumer because it is not an easy path, right? And there are no space is hot for a 7 to 10 year period. You'll have periods where it's really hot for like a year, and then like the rest of the time it's not, and your kind of fundraising is not easy. And if you're going through a 10-year period, there's up cycles, there's down cycles, there's hype periods, and there's sort of massive bear markets. And you have to navigate through all of it.
And what period would you say we're in now for consumer?
For consumer, I mean, if you're looking at consumer tech in general, non-AI, it's very much sort of a bear market trough period where it's not in fashion. For certain types of consumer AI products, it is very much a frothy time, if I were to put it mildly, where anyone with the right CV could probably raise 5 million, 10 million on an idea. And if you're sort of more into the research side and you came from the right companies, maybe hundreds, billions. Seen that, right? But of course, we also know that those times tend not to last, especially if you look back at the history of technology, not just 5 years, 10 years, where most people's memories are. Look back the last 100, 200 years of technology. We have that much history to look back on. There's a lot you can learn about investor behavior and human behavior during those periods.
And obviously, we're talking about portfolio companies, and like you're obviously doing a lot of value add for them as well. What are you advising them right now? Like in this current period with AI, it can be so noisy, and it's probably very easy for them to get distracted.
I mean, there's different types of advice. One is kind of how do you manage the fundraising environment and sort of your cash situation. Second is how do you manage your product. I think right now a lot of founders are getting very bad advice from investors around, hey, you know what? You need to sort of shoehorn AI into your product if you want to raise funding, because to most investors, the goal of a company is to raise funds, which is kind of not the point of a company. The point of a company is to, as they say, create a customer, be successful over time, and fundraising is sort of an input that helps you towards that goal. If there is some AI functionality or an AI feature that really unlocks some real value in your product, then for sure you should experiment with it. And that those ideas could be unsexy in some cases. In some cases, they could be very sexy for investors. Unsexy ideas would be where the AI is not directly exposed to the user, whether it's working in the background. Sexy ideas are users interacting with AI. Right? But you need to figure out what's right for your product, what genuinely unlocks value for the user, where are you actually seeing meaningful impact on engagement, retention, and longer term revenue, because AI does have a cost associated with it. Then is when you experiment with it. You don't shoehorn, you're like a food company and you're trying to shoehorn AI into serving something to a user, you've got a problem, right? So use it judiciously and not indiscriminately. On the funding side, I've increasingly been telling companies, look, if you're in position to raise money in the first half of this year, you probably should. If you're not, focus on generating revenue like this year, like the next 12 to 18 months in particular, I think are the time to live to fight another day, as opposed to fight right now. There are a lot of things that concern me about the current market environment, and that can create uncertainty on fundraising timelines, on investor expectations, which are sort of gradually detaching from reality in some cases. So essentially trying to get them to prepare for ensuring that they can maximize their lives right now, to make sure you have something sustainable, rather than just sort of depending on the vagaries of the market, which is, I think, increasingly in this environment getting more unpredictable.
And obviously we're seeing right now where you have these companies that say, okay, cool, we've got to like 100 million ARR in like 2 months and things like that. And obviously, as an investor, you're having to look through that and try to see what the underlying numbers are. Is there any metrics you particularly look for, you really pay attention to try to assess that?
I mean, as a consumer investor, I think ARR has never really been a meaningful metric for us to look at, which also means that we kind of need to look at the input metrics, where ARR is sort of very much an output metric, which is increasingly being calculated in very creative ways, so to speak. And that's true for both ARR and gross margins in the current environment. What I look at in order are engagement, retention, organic acquisition, monetization. So monetization is sort of right at the end of the ladder. You first need to prove out engagement, retention, organic acquisition. Engagement, retention in particular are the two most important ones that I would look at in order. And sort of the exact definitions kind of depends on each product. But as an example, right, let's say you're, Snapchat, you're trying to figure out, like, does adoption genuinely increase the value of the product? And so are the number of snaps received / opened per user going up over time? The first most basic metric, right? Well, one of the first things I saw in How About as well back in their pre-seed round is that their events created and sort of event responses per user were sort of going up anywhere between sort of 3 to 5 to 6x in like a couple of months. So you could see it very, very clearly in that data. And usually that's what I'm looking for. Everything else is kind of downstream from that. Like, it doesn't matter if you have, even if your ARR is calculated correctly and is growing very strongly and your retention and engagement don't really work, like, that's not going to last.
You mentioned as well, just on the AI point, about you're experimenting yourself, right? So I know you're doing a few different things. How are you experimenting with AI in your own?
So I'm building a robot. I think AI is a very interesting technology. Right now, the biggest questions I have about AI are around economics. And to me, the economics make most sense when you run AI locally and your inference cost effectively is zero. The marginal cost of using it is zero, right? So that really unlocks it unlocks a lot more usage. But also then you kind of have to ask your question, okay, if I'm running a model locally, what kind of product category can you build with that? Like, robots seem like the obvious way to do it. And it sounds weird that I would say to someone, I'm building a robot, but I spent about 150 pounds on the hardware, 0 pounds on the inference. And so far what I have is a voice activated car with a bunch of sensors and cameras. And I can just say, hey, drive up to that pile of books. And it'll look around, find a pile of books and drive up to it and say, hey, I reached the pile of books. And there's more stuff I'm trying to build on top of that, but that already seems like a pretty interesting demo for someone who doesn't really know how to code. So this is where Cloud Code definitely helps. And it does seem like there's something there, just in hobbyist robotics. A lot of that space just reminds me of where personal computing was in like the early 70s.
Have you got any hopes or things you want to try and do with the cars? You've taught her how to see something can go towards it. What's your next challenges you've got coming up?
So a few things I'm going to try. One is sort of following someone. Second, and this is the funnier one, is following someone while giving them a tour of what it sees. That seems fun. A couple of ones are, a guard dog mode or patrol mode, where it sort of drives around an area and tells you if it sees something out of place. Stuff like that. This particular kit that I have doesn't have an arm. The next one I try, I'll probably get an arm as well, so you'll have a whole bunch of more use cases of it, trying to pick things off the ground and getting them to you. Obviously, smaller things can't pick up like huge things. But yeah, that's sort of the universe of things. I'm open to other ideas.
So you said how you don't have a coding background, right? And for some investors, I'll ask them, like, what's their value add? But I think yours is very obvious with the kind of reputation you built about your expertise in like network effects and everything there. For the people who don't really understand what network effects is, how would you explain it?
I mean, the basic definition is a product that gets more useful as more people just start using it. And so the utility of the product increases with adoption. And so that creates this sort of self-reinforcing flywheel where once you start getting an early lead, it's almost impossible for another product to supersede you, because since they are earlier, they don't have as many users, and so they don't have the utility. And so people end up picking you as a product. Like, that's the basic definition. And it sort of manifests itself in lots of different ways, right? So How About, which is a social calendar, has obvious network effects because people use it with their friends. Even robotics that I'm experimenting with right now, I can see lots of room for network effects there, either with sort of hardware add-ons or sort of skill add-ons on top. So there's definitely room there. There are lots of different flavors of them. That's an area I can talk about for hours. I have created a course about it as well.
Hello. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I'm Amardeep Parmar, co-founder of BayHQ and the host of this show. For those of you who don't know, BayHQ is the community for high growth Asian heritage founders and investors in the UK. Over 7,500 people have attended our events, 200 people have been through our impact programs, and obviously there's been over 250 episodes of this podcast. If you want to join us and take part in the programs and come to the events, go to bayhq.com/join. We also just released our first ever book called Startups for Outsiders, which you can get on Amazon now, and the link is in the bio. Hope to see you soon at our event. Hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. When you're looking at investing, it's interesting. Do you think about companies which maybe aren't using network effects well at the moment, and you think, okay, if I invest in them, I can potentially bring my expertise and you can make a real difference? Or you're looking at people who are already doing network effects quite well and really leveraging them?
It's very tempting to do the first. The challenge with consumer products is they tend to humble you quite a bit, in the sense of you can always assume that, hey, this is a good idea, people will do this, and people will go, nope. And you'll see something and go, that's a stupid idea, and people start doing it. So I am behavior-led more than anything else. Multiplayer products are complex. Multiplayer consumer products are even more complex. And so you're always looking for the earliest signals that there is the seed of a network effect here. Like once the behavior exists, I can help the founders unlock more of it. But it's very hard for me as an investor to create something when it's not there.
So if you give an example, say with How About, for example, once you could see, okay, they've got the basic network effects there, how do you then help them to really exploit that and make the most of it?
I mean, the way I work with founders essentially is, and the How About founders were sort of fantastic at this, where they made my job insanely easy. Is we just sort of meet once a month and we're basically talking through, here's the product roadmap, this is what we're going to work on building this month, and this is what we built last month, and this is what we're seeing. And so based on the behavioral signals, so first, what should we be measuring to tell us if this is working or it's not working? And you basically kind of disaggregate user behavior and work out at every step of the user behavior of the user journey, what do you want to see? There's certain things that can be corrected, and there's certain things that are just behavior, right? And that you can't really opt for. So that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm not really building, I might suggest a few product ideas here and there, but a lot of times they can be bullshit because everyone can have ideas. But it's more so understanding what's happening on the user side, and understanding how users are reacting to the product. To any new changes, that's where I help founders more so. And
obviously there's a difference between network effects and simple virality, right? And I think a lot of people get them mixed up, and I think even, for example, when people are talking, if you're not being specific enough, you can quite easily just kind of blur the lines there. And how would you separate them out of where someone could be maybe going viral, but really not really having network effect?
I think these definitions have gotten even more modeled in sort of the current frothy environment we're in. So the definition of a network effect is the product gets more useful as more people use it. Virality, or at least product virality, is when people spread the word about a product in process of using it. So let's say Zoom, right? Let's say I'm the first user who signed up for Zoom, and we're having a call and I send you the link. So now all of a sudden you're aware of Zoom. But you could sign up for a Zoom account after that and it won't really affect my life, right? So there's no network effects there. It's purely virality. And of course, there's stuff that just spreads on social media and stuff like that. That's not anything. It's just social virality. This post went viral, because that's not even repeatable necessarily. At least the Zoom virality example is repeatable. Every single time the product is used by a user, they send the link to someone, right? So that's at least sort of a repeatable growth flywheel. A viral loop. The stuff that spreads on social media, that's not a viral loop at all. That's just, this went viral on social media today. Will it go viral tomorrow? Who knows?
Yeah, and with the network effects as well, so you obviously said you've got the course about it.
Yeah.
What do you think is some of the stuff that people get wrong a lot, or maybe the bits that people don't understand very well?
I mean, the basic one is just people tend to use very loose definitions around this stuff. And to me, most investors tend to look at network effects like Joey from Friends. Like he had a comment in one episode. He's like, you hear a word, you see a thing, that's what you think it is. Unfortunately, that's a lot of how investors view the term network effects, virality. It all sort of gets jumbled up into one thing. Mm-hmm. So as an example, like 2021, you had a whole bunch of these scooter companies, 10-minute grocery companies, Open Door, sort of home flippers, and all these companies are like, oh no, these companies have network effects. Network effect companies have been super successful, so these will also be successful. None of those companies had network effects. Like I can buy and rent a scooter, but that doesn't mean that the next user who signs up gets increased value from it because another user signed up. Mm. Or because if I rented a scooter out to somebody else, there's 20 other companies that can also go buy a bunch of scooters and rent them out. It's not like there's a supply side there. You are the supply side. Same thing with 10-minute grocery company. Like I was buying bananas, sticking them in a warehouse and selling them and delivering them to people. Like there's no network effects there. And same thing, like if I buy and sell a home, there's no multiplayer interaction that creates a network effect. It's just I am buying and selling a home. These are sort of age-old business models. A retailer operates on inventory. Hertz operates on renting assets that they have. A lot of sort of home flipping businesses are built on buying and selling homes. None of those companies have had network effects. They're not technology companies. So that was sort of an interesting dynamic. And the same thing's kind of happening in the current environment where a lot of these companies are attributed to have network effects or properties that made a whole bunch of companies massively successful. And when you look kind of closely at how these businesses work, they don't really have the fundamental elements. It's possible some of them will end up creating them over time, but so far there's not a lot there.
I feel like a classic complaint as well for people building these kind of areas is that the UK and Europe doesn't understand these effects properly, or they undervalue them maybe on the investment side. Whereas in the US, it's more that people feel like if you go to the US, you're going to get investment for this. How much do you think that's true? Do you think there is a cultural difference in how network effects are viewed or valued?
I mean, there is some difference. I wouldn't necessarily say it's dramatic. I think it's just that the US has a larger investor ecosystem. And so even if the percentage of people who understand this stuff is low, that's like a larger absolute number. Mm-hmm. And in Europe, it's just sort of the ecosystem is smaller, right? So there is probably a difference in percentage, to be completely honest with you, but I don't think like that's the biggest factor. Mm-hmm. I just think there's like a small group of people who've invested the time and effort to understand the stuff, and that will remain to be a small group of people because it takes time and effort to understand the stuff.
And obviously, like with Speedinvest, you're leading rounds into consumer companies, which you mentioned earlier was like quite a rare thing in Europe as well. What gives you the conviction to be able to do that, and for people who also don't understand about the difference between leading and following? Obviously, by leading the round, you're setting the price, you're setting all these different things. What gives you the conviction to be able to do that as opposed to obviously so many other people who just follow?
I mean, the first one is that you got to do your own work, right? It's one thing to say you invest in hot companies. It's another thing to say you've done your work in this company and this is kind of what drives conviction. And so one of the things I've always tried to do is to make up my own mind on a company, and I just think that's kind of how I'm wired. I'm generally not been sort of a follow herd. I've not been a herd thinker, so to speak. And it's kind of hard to be a herd thinker if you're a first principles thinker. Usually there's sort of two entirely different ways of thinking. And sort of the same reason why in 2021 I kind of stayed away from all of the hyped companies of the time, and I was investing in stuff that made sense to me. Even though I was investing as an angel back then, which made things difficult because you still have to find someone to lead the round. But that's kind of how I'm investing right now as well. I'm just trying to do my work to figure out what is it about this product and this founder and this company that makes sense. Is there something I don't know? What is that? How can I get better understanding that? And just go from there. And sort of let the market do what it does.
When you're investing as an angel versus as a VC as well, how much of a difference does it make to what you're looking for?
For me personally, it doesn't. Because what I'm looking for is outside success. There are some angels who kind of go, I'm going to invest in this company and I'm going to try to sell out at like a certain valuation. I think doing that certainly increases your pool of opportunities because you're not locked into finding a company that's not going all the way. But like personally, I've always found that challenging because your fundamental frame of reference at that point changes, because then you're kind of moving away from first principles to herd behavior again, because you do need herd behavior to create those near-term exit opportunities, right? And so that's something I've always personally struggled with. Like I am someone who's a long-term thinker. Like I want to see why this company or this founder, do they have what it takes to succeed the test of time? And that's what historically in investing has generated outsized return, right? Whether you're looking at public markets, private markets, it sort of works the same way of getting into the right asset and then holding on for dear life over time. And it's just how I think. It's not saying it's sort of the right way or the wrong way, but that's how I like to think. And sort of, at least in my mind, kind of fits what we're doing. It gets unpopular in certain market cycles, you might say. But like I think a great investor once said that your investing approach should not be dictated by market cycles. If you invest the same way, whether the market is thinking that every investment is going to be 1000x, or the market thinks that every investment is going to zero, your investment is generally, if you do your homework and you stay grounded, will tend to do reasonably well.
And so obviously you started more of an angel and then obviously now gone into VC. Are there any mistakes you made in the early days that now you try to avoid, or things you've learned where
for sure.
you'd made the wrong choices?
A lot of what I shared is so far is also stuff I've learned along the way. Like in my first year of investing, I in certain cases did get swayed by like everyone's trying to invest in this company, this is a really hot deal, and those in retrospect turned out to be the worst investments. I remember my worst performing investment in my first year of angel investing had 9 term sheets from the biggest name investors in Europe. I think might be some US ones as well. And the best performing one took a very, very, very long time to raise their seed round, and their pre-seed was a crowdfund. So very quickly learned that, what other investors think fundamentally does not matter. That's one. Second, I think in some cases I underestimated the importance of distribution and overestimated the importance of product. You kind of need two sides of the same coin. So learn to appreciate that a bit more, especially in consumer. Organic acquisition is important because a lot of times you're not monetizing right off the bat. And so the less you're monetizing off the bat, the more organic acquisition is important. The more you're monetizing, the more leeway you have to experiment with paid, right? So that's another thing that we learned to appreciate after that first year of angel investing.
And you mentioned as well how you had the different layers of metrics you look at, and monetization was at the bottom. How do you think about that in terms of when is the right time to start strategic monetization? Is it just very nuanced for each company, or is there some signals you look for?
It is specific to each product and company, right? So if this is meant to be a product that you use with other people, it's very hard, unless it's a marketplace that's transactional, for you to monetize off the bat, because often what can happen is your attempts to monetize can prevent adoption, which is actually harming the value of the product. And so in those cases, you have to kind of go, right, this is the product where you'll have to prove engagement retention first before you monetize. And there are certain other types of products, things that are sort of single player tools are an example, where monetization, you can monetize upfront, right? Because it doesn't harm the value of the product. Or transactional marketplaces, because by virtue of proving out the fact that you have liquidity in the marketplace, you have to monetize, right? Otherwise, if you create a marketplace that doesn't have any monetization, you might be getting false signals on the liquidity as well. Maybe people aren't willing to transact if you add a take rate in there. So those are things where it's more natural within the business model to monetize.
And we mentioned how about a few times now, right? Are there any of the companies you like one spotlight that you think have done network effects really well within your portfolio?
I mean, Hubbard's probably certainly up there. It's kind of hard to find a company that has cracked that as well as them. Like they're probably within this timeline, one of the companies one of the best mass market products that's come out of Europe with sort of millions of users. Apart from that, there are smaller companies that I think have done a good job. They're earlier in their journey. There's BlindMate in Europe that I think is doing a really good job. There's Revise in France that are moving into the UK right now. They're doing an interesting job. There's Home Cooks here in the UK that is on a very interesting trajectory, in particular this year. That's doing well. And so there's a few companies that are sort of a bit earlier in the cycle, but are learning and sort of carving out a few niches for themselves where they can expand out from there. But How About is probably the biggest mass market one.
And so I don't know if you explained what How About is for the audience who are
So the simple version is that it's a social calendar. So if you're at work and you want to find out when your coworker is free so you can grab some time with them, you can quickly take a look. But if you want to find out when your friends are free, that's not possible. So How About brings you that Google Calendar experience for your friends. And also has a lot of a social feed where you can get a quick sense of what their weeks are like what are they doing right, what are they up to right now.
And then looking forwards as well, is there any particular sectors you're looking at as where there could be a next breakout company, or are you more looking widely?
I think by nature of being a consumer and network effects investor, it's hard to pick a particular sector. And also because as an investor, you're less close to the problem than founders are, right? So you're trying to be too opinionated on that can backfire sometimes. So I usually try and focus on, right, how does the product work? Is it solving a real problem? Is there the behavior there? Is there a route for this company to be truly scalable and defensible? As opposed to trying to say, you know what, I want to invest in something that is bringing like a social experience to, I don't know, like a note taking or something, right? There you can quickly run into trouble. So yeah, much more open about sort of what these products look like. Increasingly looking at sort of more multiplayer products that have AI under the hood, where inference every engagement does not require inference, so you're more insulated against like input shocks. So that's one sort of broad interest area that I'm looking at. But yeah, outside of that, like I generally would not be too specific about the kinds of problems that I'm looking to solve.
Do you see as well, is there, because obviously there's fewer consumer investors than say B2B investors in Europe. Do you see similar numbers of deal flow and you're having to filter more aggressively, or are there fewer consumer companies out there in Europe as well?
I think it's probably, there are sort of a smaller group of consumer investors for sure, especially at this stage. Mm-hmm. Like there's a few generalist investors that do everything, but in terms of consumer, it's a smaller group. But in general, I think the number of consumer companies will be smaller than the number of B2B companies because there's more B2B investors. So, whenever there's supply and demand shows up to match it and the other way around. In 2021 was a bit of an aberration where there were a lot of consumer companies because that was the year where everyone's investing in consumer, right? So I think that's corrected over time. And so yeah, it's not that there's hundreds of companies that show up every day and you have to super aggressively filter. There are, I think, a lot of consumer AI companies. But yeah, that's an interesting sort of dynamic. Anytime a space gets hot, you get a lot of volume there all of a sudden. But that's not always a good thing because, again, people jump in for the wrong reasons. So you have to do some aggressive filtering of the founders.
And what does your general process look like? Is it, I think with Speedinvest, you have the form online, right? That people can...
We do, I'm pretty open about how founders can contact me or ping me on LinkedIn, drop me an email, go for it. Like I list my email on my LinkedIn, right? For me, it is just like, it's hard to respond to every single email, but if I see something interesting, generally I'll get back to them. The first filter is just like a first call. If I like what I'm seeing, to get a sense of, what's your motivation, what's driving this, what's your story of how you got to this point. And after that, it's like, give me a step-by-step breakdown of how the product works. Product demo is sort of ideal because then you can kind of see where the network effects are or aren't, or you can see what makes it defensible or what doesn't make it defensible. That's usually pretty deeply embedded in the product itself. And then getting a sense of, okay, what's the mode of distribution for this product? What have you experimented with so far? So that's broadly what I'm trying to get a sense of in the first call. And after that, next step for me is to dig into behavior. So what are we seeing so far? What's working? What's not working? There's some things that you expect to be broken at that stage. Those things are fixed. That's fantastic, but I'm not expecting those to be fixed. And there's other things that are sort of non-negotiables that I'm expecting to see. If those are not there, I'm like, okay, either it's too early for me, or it's there's something here that fundamentally doesn't work. Something about the core assumptions behind the product, there's something broken there. And it's very hard to separate those two early on. And this is where I always caution investors from making too many assumptions about what people will do.
And what we're doing now, so we're getting people on, say, every 2 years, roughly. So this will be episode, I think it was 290 something. So if we get you back on 490 something, what would you love to be able to say that in that time you've done?
That I've made my first robotics investment, and I see a path to network effects for that product. Like, that to me is a big one. Another one would be like, we probably went through an economic crisis and we survived it. That's a good one because it does seem like that is inevitable at this point. But yeah, again, that's a big one for me. I think hobbyist robotics is probably the most fascinating space right now, looking forward for the next couple of years. Like, do I think I'll make an investment there in the next 1 year? Probably not. 2 years out, I hope I get to make at least one. And then sort of increasingly more going forward.
So we're going to go to wrap-up questions now. So the first one is, who are 3 Asians in Britain you think are doing incredible work? And do you want to shout them out?
In Britain, first, Neil from Harvard. He's probably my favorite. That's my favorite founding team of all time. So definitely him, number one. Dipali, this is partly my Speedinvest bias. She's a fantastic person. She's always going to help you. I think most people who've met her love her because she's so helpful. Third, tricky one, but I'll probably say Reese. Obviously, he's probably you mentioned he's the most popular shout-out, but probably well-deserved. He's surprisingly helpful, especially for someone who's had so much success, and surprisingly down to earth. And so yeah, great guy.
Awesome. So I think that gives Reese his 10th shout-out. So the first one to get to 10, yeah. And then, so you mentioned how if people can reach out to you through LinkedIn and email, or if you want to find out more about Speedinvest and about what you invest into, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm usually pretty loud about what I like. You can check out the Speedinvest website. I've probably got a few blogs on the Speedinvest blog on what I like to see. I also have a personal blog, breadcrumb.vc, where I write a lot about what I like and what I'm scared about and what I'm fearful of. You can find my work usually on LinkedIn. You can look at it there.
And is it in a way that the audience could help you today?
If you are building something interesting in consumer technology, just feel free to reach out. Or if you know someone interesting building something in consumer technology, send them my way.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
Any final words?
No, that's everything.